I don't know how you would characterize the gang leaders who got 13-year-old kids hopped up on crack and sent them out onto the street to murder other African-American children. Maybe you thought they were good citizens. She didn't. She didn't. You are defending the people who kill the lives you say matter. Tell the truth.
Sir, the Republicans are trying to blame you for the existence of a small air base at Mena, Arkansas. This base was set up by George Bush and Oliver North and the CIA to help the Iran-Contras, and they brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there for sale in the United States. And then they took the money and bought weapons and took them back to the Contras, all of which was illegal, as you know, under the Bolin Act. But tell me, did they tell you that this had to be in existence because of national security?
Well, let me answer the question. No, they didn't tell me anything about it. They didn't say anything to me about it. The airport in question and all the events in question were the subject of state and federal inquiries. It was primarily a matter for federal jurisdiction. The state really had next to nothing to do with it. The local prosecutor did conduct an investigation based on what was within the jurisdiction of state law. The rest of it was under jurisdiction of the United States attorneys who were appointed successively by previous administrations. We had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's ever looked into it knows that. I don't know how you would characterize the gang leaders who got 13-year-old kids hopped up on crack and sent them out onto the street to murder other African-American children. Maybe you thought they were good citizens. She didn't. She didn't. You are defending the people who kill the lives you say matter. Tell the truth.
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false. We had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's ever looked into it knows that.
I spoke to Ortega, and I asked him this question, and I said, if the United States government stopped funding the Contras, how long do you think they would last? And he went, they wouldn't last very long. What you're talking about is the United States invasion of another nation. Without the support of the United States government, these people would be gone very, very quickly. And I think that that's clear to understand. You're not talking about a civil war, massive discontent. You're talking about a small number of people, very heavily armed, trained, and financed by the United States of America.
Let's talk about what could be the most explosive issue of this campaign if the mass media would get a hold of it and do something about it, but they're covering it up. And that is you were talking about the government involvement in drugs. There have been government investigations, there have been private investigations, and we've interviewed a lot of people, ex-CIA people, who have talked about the CIA involvement in drug operations for many decades. It's public knowledge, though once again the media are not saying anything about it, that Oliver North and his people involved with the Contras have been running drug operations, cocaine primarily, bringing it back into the United States. And there are other investigations which show that George Bush's office, Donald Gregg particularly, and the people he was working with, have been supervising an enormous drug operation, which once again was sending illegal arms down to the Contras and elsewhere, and bringing cocaine and other types of drugs back into the United States. But neither the Democrats aren't talking about this. Now, are the libertarians talking about this, and do they put this into the framework of the drug law situation that you're talking about?
We talk about a whole lot. Of course, we always have the trouble of getting the attention that we think it deserves. There have been a few Democrats have talked about it. Senator Kerry's office has done some work.
He's done a lot of the investigation.
Right, and I think he's on to something, and I think we've gotten some other information too, of course, that the CIA has given Noriega over the years $200,000 a year
Oh, yes.
And they kept feeding him money, even when Bush was the head of the CIA. I think George Bush is deep into it, well over his head. Somebody asked me once if I thought George Bush knew about as much what's going on as Ronald Reagan. I think George Bush knew a lot more about what was happening in the CIA, because I think Reagan was probably more removed from it. I mean, just by his own personality and maybe his age or something. But I think George Bush, through his office and through the fact that he was a member of this, head of the CIA, I think he was very, very close to it. He knows exactly what was happening, and I believe the rule that once a CIA member, always a CIA member. And I think it's awful interesting. Can you imagine? It would alarm a few of us in this country if all of a sudden we knew that the leader in the Soviet Union would be the head KGB agent, and here we take our head CIA agent and put him, potentially the head of our entire country. Unfortunately, I wish that we could get this information out, and I continue to talk about it, but I sadly believe that there will be very little said, which means that the Democrat aren't doing it, that means they're involved too.
They're involved also.
And I don't think there's any doubt about it. I mean, it was even some of it got reported in the Iran-Contra scandals. We did know that there were drugs involved, and they were selling drugs back and forth.
There have been a lot of allegations thrown around that the Contra resupply operation was involved in cocaine trafficking.
We found absolutely no evidence during my tenure at the NSC that any of the resistance leaders were themselves or their subordinates involved in drug running.
Although there was enough evidence to warrant investigation into CIA drug trafficking, there was no serious interest on the part of committee members, and no first-hand witnesses were called. At one point, the hearings were disrupted by two observers who burst out in protest. For these actions, the protesters were handed down stiff jail sentences of over a year each.
May all the Democrats forgive me this close to the election. I love George Bush. I do. And this man whom I'd always liked and respected and then run against in a painful campaign in some ways, I literally came to love.
My mother calls me my fourth brother. Calls him my fourth brother.
Is that right?
The black sheep of the family. That Barbara began to refer to me as her black sheep son. The one that strays. There's one in every family. Gets the politics wrong or makes some other mistake. He can virtually do no wrong in my eyes, even though he, every 5 years, makes me look like a wimp by insisting on continuing to jump out of airplanes. I love you.
Sir, the Republicans are trying to blame you for the existence of a small air base at Mena, Arkansas. This base was set up by George Bush and Oliver North and the CIA to help the Iran-Contras, and they brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there for sale in the United States. And then they took the money and bought weapons and took them back to the Contras, all of which was illegal, as you know, under the Bolin Act. But tell me, did they tell you that this had to be in existence because of national security?
Well, let me answer the question. No, they didn't tell me anything about it. They didn't say anything to me about it. We had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's ever looked into it knows that.